Hey everybody, I am Jarek Ostrowski, product designer on the Foundations team. And this is forget what you know about empty states, kind of. Okay, let me get started. So this quarter we've been just actually let me just back up before I get started. So right now I'm currently working on an empty state OKR to sort of solidify and define what our empty states are, what they're used for. And there's just a bunch of things that I have noticed along the way, both with interacting with designers on our team, talking about empty states, and also just sort of diving deep into what our current empty state documentation says and what our components are, what confusion there is. And so I've come up with sort of a direction to go, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So empty states are a region, they're not a component. So what I mean by that is, yes, we have empty state components, but those are really components to use in an empty state region. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about the differentiation between the component and the region here as we move forward. But I want people to start thinking of empty states as a region and not necessarily the component. And so I'm sort of trying to change the mindset. The empty state component should be considered a fallback or a method to use in an empty state region. It shouldn't be, okay, we have an empty state, we're going to use the empty state component. I think there's one thing that I want to emphasize more than anything, but there's nothing wrong with using them. But I think we can be more creative as designers, and it's going to differ case by case. So I'm trying to create this framework around empty states with goals of empty states. So empty states, regardless of solution or method, should increase onboarding, increase usability, and increase understanding. So regardless of whatever method you use, and if you do use empty state component, to still accomplish one or both or all of these things when it comes to an empty state. And so regardless of solution, they should accomplish one or more of the above, like I mentioned. And by the way, using our empty state components can still accomplish the above. So I'm not saying don't use those. I think they're still useful to accomplish these goals, but I think we can think outside the box a little bit more as designers. So this is like the idea, get creative, be a designer. We're all here because we're all creative people, incredibly creative people. And being on the Foundations team, I don't want designers on our team to feel stagnated, to feel like they can't be creative because we say you have to use this and this in an empty state. Like, I don't want people to think like that. I want people to go into an empty state and think to themselves, how can we increase onboarding, usability, and understanding, regardless of method? Like, get creative, think about some ideas of where we can be intelligent and use intelligent methods to accomplish those goals, rather than just say, oh, well, here's what I got to do. I got to use this thing that the Foundations team said. I want to sort of get that out of our minds, and I want us to think more creatively and outside of the box as designers. And so here's just one example. Again, this is just like something I proposed. Alexis, thank you for creating this issue. This got me thinking and like further deeper into this idea of trying to encourage our design team to be more creative with empty states. It was about, what do we do where we have an epic with 0 related issues or 0 related epics? Now, typically, we could put a blank content empty state in here to say what this is. You don't have any related issues here. Here's documentation on how to add them. Go find one, or just explain and increase understanding. Sure, we could do that. That's fine. That's a good default. But I think we can go a little bit further than that here. Why not create a list of suggested issues and epics that people can simply add with a click? We can do this either simply or more advanced by doing some keyword matching, doing it based on activity, So if I created an epic that said provide methods for thinking beyond static empty states, if there are no related issues or epics here, why not? Oh, there's one issue in GitLab that talks about a new empty state method, which matches keywords. So this is just one way we can increase onboarding and increase usage of this particular feature in GitLab, rather than got to go to the issue, copy the link, go back, paste it in. Okay, now it's there. And there's other similar methods to doing so. But the idea here is really to like think beyond the empty state and how can we make it easier for people to onboard in these features. Another one that really inspired me, Kevin shared with me, was using CI/CD templates as a way to get started using GitLab CI. Instead of linking to documentation, here's how you do it, here's what this feature does, and going back and forth, which can create a lot of friction. And it's not a bad thing. It's good. We should be linking to documentation on how to use certain features, but it shouldn't be the only way. There's plenty of ways, and this way is to almost create a demo, almost a feature in itself for using templates that already exist. So that's one way to increase usage and increase understanding, is to get people to play with a feature before they actually use it in production. So I think this is another great example. And then I just listed some other opportunities because it's going to be different use case by use case. If a getting started documentation, so say, like I was just saying, empty state, link to documentation to read more on how to configure something. Instead of linking them out, if it's just a simple couple sentences or a snippet or a command to run, why not put that right in the empty state? Like, we can reduce that friction and reduce having them go back and forth. Now, it's still valuable to have them link out to the documentation to get the full scope, but if we can reduce their need to go back and forth and have to do that, then I think we should take that opportunity to do that. Another one, just like totally blue sky thinking, how can we make things more engaging and increase usage? Why not create a video tutorial, put it on unfiltered? There's a benefit there to, pushing content and educational content out to the world, but also why not link to that from an empty state? A lot of us use video tutorials. I know I use video tutorials for a ton of things. And it's basically how I learned to do most things that I know how to do. So, maybe think about that. Maybe think about linking out to a tutorial, and maybe, you can, and again, these are like features. So you would go and, make some of these, but you'd also want to test them. Of course, you want to get feedback and to make sure that it's actually a useful thing to do, because obviously we're not just going to put that out there and just say, oh, this is the assumed thing. I think everyone's going to go through the same process. So I don't know where I put that. Okay, so I did put sort of the idea here is think of an empty state like a problem, much like you do with any other product problem. So what's the problem? People aren't using the feature. Okay, what are some solutions we can explore? Let's test those. Do they increase usage? And I'm actually talking with Kevin right now and on the growth team. And I think it'd be really awesome to come up with sort of somewhat of a process, to determine how we can, create a process for everyone to run experiments and to create empty states that we can actually measure. Still, like, I literally just came up with this morning and proposed it. So who knows, I'm not sure where that's going to go, but I'm working closely with him on, because he's done a few of these experiments already. So he has that knowledge. And then ultimately the end goal of all this is to just get creative and be a designer. We don't want to stagnate you, because, as a designer, I don't want to feel creatively stagnated or like I can't do things. Like, these are the rules. We have guidelines and we have things in place, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't think outside the box and think like, how can we make this even better? And I really want to drive that point home that we should be, I encourage everyone to think outside of the box and push for interesting empty state features. So in summary, Empty state regions should increase onboarding, increase usability, and increase understanding. This is something that we're still like fleshing out right now, but that's sort of the premise and the idea. Empty states are a region and not a component. I actually had the first question in my own presentation in the UX showcase to propose this question and sort of get the ball rolling, because I think that was something I was also like wrestling with, because you know, when we say empty state, we think of the component. We don't think of the instance or like the situation or the region as it's called. Our empty state component is only one method for achieving the above goals. And each empty state region is unique and provides a unique set of opportunities and problems. One method is not going to be the best solution for all cases. So that's why I'm sort of like framing this empty state documentation and framework around these goals, because to reach those goals, you could do it in a number of different ways. And one solution in one place, like the CI template thing feature, is not going to translate over to something, a different empty state instance. So it's going to vary by use case, and just to look at that use case and how you can achieve those goals. And that's it. I'll ask thoughts and questions, but I actually do want to sort of propose this and get anyone's thoughts here. Should we rename or remove the empty state component to reduce confusion between an empty state region and the empty state component? And I ask that because we have a banner component, which is essentially is a duplicate of the compact empty state component. So would people feel more clear around empty state documentation if we remove the empty state component and said the banner was the default to use for empty states? What do people think? Thank you. Daniel, do you want to verbalize?
Yes, I do. Thanks for sharing this, Jarek. It's really interesting. And I think on this topic of should we rename or not the empty state, I feel like this proposal you made feels broader than the empty state. The empty state for me communicates like this thing is empty, which might be a fallback, might be the correct use case for some scenarios, but we might have to think of a name for the new pattern that you're proposing, like onboarding block or onboarding state, or something that really conveys what you just presented, right? Let's get creative into getting people to adopt this specific feature, this specific page.
Gotcha. That's great feedback. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
Blair, do you want to verbalize your comment?
Yes, yes. I think I'm actually going to change that right now. So I'm going to say yes, exclamation point. I think we should get rid of it as a component. And the reason for that is I would, especially in the way that you framed it, with sort of how, you know, just making empty states more useful. I love both examples that you gave, going straight into using templates, you know, instead of locking the user at a stopping point, keeping them going. Or the previous example, which was sort of using keyword searches or something like that. Just, you know, it's a little bit of a shot out in the dark, right? To rely on that mechanism. But if we nail that one thing that one user's been trying to look for with those links, I mean, huge win right there with very little investment. But I put yes. The reason I say yes is that I think empty states, especially in that, are more of a content design than they are a component.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I came to the conclusion with. And we refer to empty states all the time. I just don't want people to think about the component or like which are they talking about when we're talking about empty states, because I was confused by that in the beginning when I joined Foundations, and I have talked to people about empty states and they think I'm talking about the component as I'm actually talking about the region. So yeah, I think that's sort of the direction I'm going. So thank you for your feedback. Austin, do you want to verbalize?
Yeah, I jumped over to the pajamas documentation and I saw empty state is under regions and not components already. So I guess I was a little bit confused. I was like, is there a change that was going to be proposed and not be proposed now, or?
Well, this was kind of a last minute thought and question that I wanted to throw out there because I had thought of this a while back, but then I just came back to me. It is in regions in pajamas, but it's a component. So it's the inverse of what I'm talking. So like if it's in components, but then it's also a region. So then there's that confusion too. So yes, it is under regions technically, but it's also a component, which is the confusion.
It's a component like on the back end. It's built as a component that can be reused throughout the site. I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So technically, it's considered a component. If you look at GitLab UI, it falls under regions, but it is still a component.
Yeah. That makes sense. I guess if I had to say like something around that topic, then I think it should still exist as a component in the backend. Like I think we should have a standard empty state. It's got an illustration, it's got some text for the purposes of when that is appropriate, but maybe conceptually as how we address the empty states in our product, it can be more creatively approached to than just having to use the component that's in GitLab UI.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And part of my concern too is our banners, which, I mean, if you look at a compact empty state component and a banner component, they're essentially the same. So, I mean, Daniel, I like your thought of perhaps renaming it something related to empty states, but then I'm also thinking since we have banners, you know, would it be clear if we wrote in the documentation for empty states, use a banner component as the default or as a fallback to achieve these three goals? I mean, that's sort of, and we can talk async too, because I don't want to take up the entire time. So I'll create an issue around this and then I'll link it in the showcase docs. So if people want to continue to chime in. But thank you all for your feedback so far.
I think I'm up next. So I really like how you're thinking about this. Design systems do have a ton of benefits, and I'm really glad that we have such a wonderful design system, but nothing is 100% perfect, right? And this is one of the downsides of a design system is I think you're right. It does encourage people sometimes to think more in terms of components than the problems that they're trying to solve. And it's like you go into this design system, it's this library, and your brain automatically goes into like shopping mode. Like I'm just going to start pulling items off of the shelf and putting them in my grocery cart. I think especially with something like empty states, because as designers, we don't tend to think a lot about empty states. It's almost just kind of like, oh, and then this little thing. Yeah, okay, I'm just gonna slap this in here. But you're right, there is a ton that we could be doing with these. And when I think about one of our goals is to increase conversion stages per organization between create, verify, and release. That's maybe someplace we could even start is thinking, because not just because it's good for GitLab, but our users are asking for this too. When you look at verbatims like from SUS and NPS, people talk about like, you've got things that I don't even know you have. So this is in service to our users saying like, hey, we can make your life easier with this thing. And I think you're right. When I look at our empty states, we're not doing a great job of that today. I think this is where your head is going. So I'll kind of TLDR how I'm thinking about it, which is great, rename it, don't rename it, I don't know. Maybe the simplest solution though is document it better in pajamas. Take the concept of what you've talked about today, move that into our documentation so it's really clear up front that these are the purposes of an empty state. Get people thinking, because they're there anyway, they're pulling components off the shelf. Remind people, yeah, this is the UX behind an empty state, and see if that starts to solve the problem.
Absolutely. Thank you for that feedback. Yeah, that's sort of the primary goal, is to really emphasize it through the documentation. The renaming part was kind of just like an added thought. But yeah, no, I love your analogy though. Analogies are the best way to explain things. So.
Every once in a while, I do a good analogy. It's rare though. So, hey, you all witnessed it today.
Right. So my next one, I think it's not so much to Jarek, but to any technical writers that might be on the call. Do you have any existing strategies to keep documentation snippets up to date when we use them outside of the docs? This is referring to Jarek's suggestion to, if there's a small command that solves the goal of the user, then we can put it in the empty state. I feel like if we start doing that in volume, even though it might make users' life easier, over time, these snippets will get outdated when documentation changes, right? So if we don't have any process for that, maybe we should think of some sort of JSON with a list of, I don't know, documentation snippets, something that can at least keep a record of which pieces of the docs are being used in the UI, just so we can easily make sure they're up to date as we update the docs as well.
Yeah, this is a great, I'll just comment on this, Daniel. Thank you for mentioning this. And people have mentioned this to me, talking in issues and, proposing the video tutorial idea. It's kind of the same thing, right? You might create a video tutorial, but that could become outdated too. And so how do we keep those things up to date? And I think these are just really examples that I was coming up with to get people thinking. It's not necessarily, going to be a recommendation in the documentation for empty states, but just sort of to get people thinking of, outside of our component, how can we, make lives easier and increase onboarding and usage for these particular features. And I like the idea of doing that. That seems fascinating to use like a JSON file. But, again, if you take that on, I think that's part of the responsibility you go into when you're proposing an idea to have a snippet in an empty state. So I think that's just going to be a part of the probably documentation, maybe as an example, to take that on as well if you decide to do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's a reason for us not to do it. Like, let's not do videos because they'll get outdated, but then just to think even further, right? How to make them part of the process and the product.
Absolutely. Great thought. Thank you.
I'll get the next one. Yeah, just a quick thought too, because a lot of this surrounds kind of a decision tree. We could put that in pajamas in the documentation, but we could also, support it with issue templates that everyone would be seeing as a new empty state is created, that eventually would lead to output requirements for design, content, dev to follow. So we have those decisions like, is this an empty state for a new feature? Is it this? Is it this? And based on those, you essentially end up populating your issue description that would then lead to the output. So it's another way to help kind of complement that and get it in documentation that is actionable. So.
Definitely, no, it's a great thought. I'm still like super early on sort of refining this process right now, but that's definitely something I'm thinking about. And how we can involve growth or how, and so just like cross collaboration too, and how we can involve there. But yeah, I love that idea. Thank you all for your questions and thoughts.